Good morning. Thank you so much, Tom and everyone that's doing service this morning. My name is Lesa B, and I'm a recovered compulsive overeater, and I'm here in Greenville, South Carolina. And it's such a privilege to be able to sit in a seat in the room of Alcoholics Anonymous and to be living in the solution. So my sobriety date is March 17th, 1987. And I got sober in Delray Beach, Florida. I was born, I'm originally from Northern New Jersey, and I'll just share with you my very first AA meeting and what it was like for me getting to that point, and then what happened with me. My beautiful brother, Steve, brought me to my first AA meeting, and it was New Year's Eve of 1986, and I went really just to support him. He was in the throes of a very, very serious drug addiction. And he really took to the rooms of AA, and he asked me to go with him. He was going to be picking up his 9-month chip. And I was watching from a distance a transformation beginning to happen to him. And it intrigued me. So that was my very first meeting. It was a New Year's Eve meeting. It was an anniversary meeting. So it was really a pumped up meeting with about 150 people. And I couldn't believe that there was this society going on and people were really happy. And I heard a solution. Now, when I was sitting there, I thought this is really just for him and you guys. I had no idea it applied to me too. So I left that meeting and went out, on a date actually, and continued on my life, with drinking. And I didn't come back until March of that. Well, actually, I kept coming to meetings, but my sobriety date is March 17th of that following year, 1987. So I had my very first drink when I was 15, and I was in New Jersey, and I was with my best friend, Irene, and we were with Danny, and I can't remember his name, but some other young boy, and we got a bottle of wine. And it's interesting because I think about my very first AA meeting and the excitement I felt, but I actually felt the exact same thing when I had that first drink of alcohol. I loved the way it made me feel. And I now know that I have an allergy of the body. It is genetic. I mean, it does run in my family, and I've got it. Not everyone in my family has it, but I knew right away, I could feel the allergy in me. And this little voice said to me, this is going to be a problem, because it was so amazing. And I said to Irene, how is it that people are not drinking all the time? And she didn't have that experience. And I just loved alcohol, and I knew I would be visiting it over and over again. And I got sober when I was 24. And, for that span of time between 15 and 24, which is not a lot of years, and not all those years I was drinking, but it was enough of the insanity. But for me, and that's why I love the reading, it's the personality problems that I have suffered with the most as an alcoholic, and the spiritual malady that truly has weighed on me the most, and the mental aspect of this illness. And I truly believe, just like it says in the AA 12 and 12 in step 1, and it's a great reading, it talks about people coming in, young people coming in, and that they were spared the last 10 or 15 years of literal hell. And that's really and truly what happens to me. I was thinking about, before I came on this meeting, about the 3rd step prayer, and I try to live that. And really what that prayer says is, God, let me bring glory to you and bear witness to your way of life. To your way of life. This is an amazing way of life, but I had to be broken to want to live that way of life. Just like it says in AA step 1, the 12 and 12, who's going to want to do this unless they have to? And I really didn't realize that I had to do this until a few years being in the program. So yes, that span of time between 15 and 24, when I stopped drinking, I did the drunk driving, all of that craziness, which I don't even need to talk about, the projectile vomiting, not being able to leave the toilet, just horribleness. And, I sponsored a woman not too long ago who's my age and was just struggling now with getting sober. And she told me that in the beginning, when she drank, she always got sick too. But the longer you keep drinking, you stop getting sick. So I hadn't reached that point yet, but I know it would have happened. I could see flashes of images of what my life would have been like had I stayed in the alcohol. And I shared it with my sponsor not too long ago, because in prayer and meditation, and I was wrestling with a problem, and it just kind of came before me that the immense gratitude that I really need to have, that my life has truly been saved. I've been saved from the pit of alcoholism by God's grace. And it's only been God's grace that has kept me here. Because for many years, I didn't do the steps. I didn't do the work. I lived a middle of the road solution. I relied on meetings and meeting-based sobriety to try and give me some semblance of sanity and happiness. And I just tried to take from the rooms. And like what a dear mentor says, the wisdom of the rooms can be a sick place. Sometimes just relying on the rooms only is not the healthiest thing to do, because we're all alcoholics. I needed that spiritual transformation and that personality change. But I think about what my life would have been like. And it would have been so treacherous. I truly believe I would have gone to drugs. I would have gone into I would have been married multiple times. I would have been in debt, just all kinds of things, because I have those tendencies. So I'll flash forward, skip a little bit. My very first sponsor, I'm so grateful for her, because she was very loving and kind, but she didn't push me. And that's just probably what I needed. But we went through the steps through the AA 12 and 12, which is a great book. It's a wonderful AA approved literature, essays on the steps, and kind of a look at what the steps are, but really not the specific directions. And that's what we did. And I didn't really understand the fourth step and the whole point of my freedom depends on my seeing clearly, column 4, what my mistakes are. I didn't really get all that. So I didn't really understand 6 and 7. And it's not about bad AA or bad sponsorship. It's just where I was at that time in the 80s and what happened to me. So my sponsor originally that I had stopped going to meetings. And you know what? I followed suit. I stopped going to meetings. And I went, believe it or not, a number of years without going to AA meetings. And I got very, very sick emotionally and spiritually. I met my husband, who I'm still married to now. We'll be married 30 years. He never saw me, quote unquote, as a drunk alcoholic, but he saw me many years, many years as a dry drunk. And with that spiritual malady and that personality problem. And we moved to South Carolina from South Florida, and I hit this wall. We were watching TV, my husband and I, in this empty house. I didn't have my connection of whatever I had in Florida. And the alcoholism was just like on me. And I said, I'm going to go crazy. Like, I'm going to either kill myself and kill him or something. So I called the AA hotline here in Greenville. And this really nice woman answered the phone. She told me about a meeting the next day. I walked into an AA meeting, and that was my first meeting in a few years. And you know what? What happens to me as an alcoholic is if I don't treat this illness with the steps, I get very, very sick. And it's truly by God's grace that I didn't pick up something like go to the dentist and have them say, oh, would you like some pain medication, or pick up anything, a drink or a drug. It's just God's grace that carried me through. And it took me, I was in worse case emotionally and spiritually walking into that meeting then than I was my very first meeting. And that's the progression of the illness. So I met a very nice sponsor. We went through the big book, and I did start to experience some emotional sobriety and transformation of that personality. And I stopped doing the work. I stopped living in steps 10, 11, and 12. And, that's so much of my story with 36 years of sobriety. Many of those years, sobriety. So many times I would stop doing the work and I would rest on my laurels. I didn't understand, just like in the beginning, I didn't understand column 4 in the fourth step. When we're doing our fourth step according to the set of directions in our big book, we're learning a skill set that is really meant that I'm supposed to rest on that or live on that and do that for the rest of my life. Steps 4 through 9 is really step 9, 10, 11, and 12, and I stopped that work. And then I would get into a horrible place again of emotional bankruptcy and spiritual pain. And that would happen again. And then I would listen to a lot of AA talks on YouTube and start to hear the strong message. For me, for a while, it had been hard to find really solid meetings where we're not just talking about the problem and, like, don't drink, go to meetings, and, don't drink if your butt falls off, or whatever they say, put it in a bag, carry it with you. Or whatever, don't drink no matter what. And the thing is, if I really apply what this big book is telling me, if I'm an alcoholic of the type that this big book is written, I'm not able to keep myself sober. So for whatever reason, this is so much a part of my story, I had to hit another spiritual bottom. And for me, that happened right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I really wanted to get high or use or something. I'd never got into drugs because my brother was a drug addict and I was terrified of him. And he did eventually die as a result of his drugs. He did get in the program, but I don't know if he died picking up or using. I don't really know all of it, but I know that he was a really hardcore drug addict. And I know I have it in me, anything that gives me an effect. So I was terrified of drugs, and I can't even take credit for that. That's just God's grace. So when it was during the pandemic, a dear fellow, sent me a speaker on my text, and he's a wonderful speaker out of Miami, and he talked about people with long-term sobriety that are really sick. They haven't had a drink, they haven't used, but they're very sick in the rooms of AA. And that what is going on for us. And I started listening to him, and I didn't know how to reach out to him. So I knew what his work was because he would mention it in passing. So I wrote to his office. I wrote a letter by snail mail. I sent him a letter, and he wrote me back, and he said, I put you on my email list. And he sent me all these meetings. And this was during the pandemic, the very beginning. And I got on, let me see how my time is. And I started listening, and it was like I was listening for the first time. And I just have to tell you, I know that this stuff was talked about in AA meetings. I know it was, but I'm the one that was I couldn't hear it. I didn't want to hear it because, as a result of doing this work intensely all through the pandemic and now still, I've learned that I didn't really want to surrender at depth like it talks about. For me, so much of it was a third step problem. I wanted to worship me. I didn't want to worship God. I didn't really want to understand that I have to submit to my creator, my maker, and see that I need this power to the very core of my being. I didn't really want to do that until I got into enough pain. And it made me think of what I used to see my brother do, sit on the edge of his bed crying. And he'd say to me and my mother, he'd say, I don't want to use, but I can't stop. And I could really understand how he felt, because even though I wasn't drinking, it's like my personality and my character defects just had me in such a vice. And I hit a bottom, and I went through this work in an intensive way several times during the pandemic, all on Zoom. And I met a new sponsor. I had done my amends through the step work, or I wouldn't have been able to stay sober as long as I had. I had done my amends, but I needed a deeper, new experience. In the big book, it tells us be quick to see where religious people are right. I really hadn't been doing that. I still had a little bit of a chip. I mean, it had come down quite a bit, but I still had a chip on my shoulder about religion. And this mentor that I got from Miami, he used to say, he used to talk about himself, and he'd say, I used to say, or he hears people in the room say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, like we're better than religious people. I have become religious. I have become religious. I've become more spiritual, but I have become religious. And it talks about in the big book, and we agnostics, how, if we look at them, we see that they really were making their life work, that they had something bigger than themselves and structure. I used to look down my nose at religious people. I don't do that anymore. I joined a Bible study that I learned about through my mentor in Florida, a women's Bible study. That has been transformative to me. I learned about that's actually the book they used before the big book was even written and published. I've had to let go of that prejudice. That's really been that, and good sponsorship and understanding these steps. That has been for me the most transformative in my personality. Learning to go to God, my creator, for everything. That relationship has been restored because and you know what? It's not like I've arrived. This is ongoing for the rest of my life. I have to continue living step 10, 11, and 12. But really seeing that presence, my life depends on having a committed relationship with that presence, with that being, and not having that attitude of superiority. Not competing, for the driver's seat. I was still competing. I wanted to be God on so many levels. So this really brings me to that reading on page 1. I love that reading. When I had my first drink at 15, the reason it had such a tremendous effect for me is because I have an allergy of the body, but I have an obsession of the mind. And what that means for me is I am truly restless and irritable and discontented until I can again experience that effect of ease and comfort. And that's what alcohol did for me. Compulsive shopping has done it for me. Food has done it for me. Relationships has done it for me. And, with the way that the illness progresses of alcoholism, anything that I use to get an effect other than my higher power, I am going to eventually go back to my true drug of no choice. And that is the path that I was on, which for me is alcohol. I'm also a recovered compulsive overeater. So my life depends on having that relationship. I can't rely on the tools of the program, including the amazing step of step 12 sponsorship. I can get really heavy in step 12 and weak in the other areas and rely on sponsorship to try and keep me emotionally sober and spiritually fit. I love sponsorship. I have to do sponsorship. My life depends on it. I can't rely on it. That's happened to me. I'll get a whole bunch of sponsees. I'll be working. And I'm not really looking at my inventories and my prayer and meditation. I've been looking at what I call acceptable sins, So it's like I have cash register honesty, but I have other things like intolerance that I really struggle with. And those are the things that my higher power today really wants me to continue to bring to him. I call my higher power him, selfishness, self-centeredness, pride, all those things, it's the subtlety of those things can cause me eventually to pick up a drink, but it's the subtlety that's so deadly. And it takes a lot of work. It really does. My length of time in prayer and meditation and spiritual readings has really had to increase. That's because the progression of this disease. Alcoholism continues to progress. Recovery continues to progress. But if I do what I did 2 years ago in recovery, it's not enough anymore. I have to keep growing and enlarging, that spiritual relationship. So I'm starting to run out of steam, but let me just look. I want to look real quick at that reading to see if there's anything else. About changing myself to meet conditions. Yeah. That's that reliance on God, my creator. I heard in a meeting the other day that his sponsor had suggested to him to pray that God would give him the very best possible attitude. And you know what? I have been doing that. That prayer has really been helping me. God, please help me to have the very best possible attitude in this situation. Help me to bring glory to you. Let me take the back seat. Let me let you shine. I'll just share this. I heard on a talk the other day I was giving. I was listening. And it said, what does it mean to be walking in the light? What does it mean? It's a quote from the Bible, walking in the light, living in the light. And I thought it would have meant just being truly honest. It means that I know that I'm broken, that I'm a sinner, and that I need a savior. Now, for me, that's the place I had to get. I couldn't just have a higher power. I really had to get a savior. And that's what I have found during the pandemic. So with that, I pass. I'm grateful to be here. I pass.